Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staton and Jeff Simmons here, as we always are, on a Monday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. And Jeff, I promised everybody today that we are going to get into the big topics. We're not going to shirk anything. If you think that we are shirking anything, send us a super chat and let us know that there's something you want to talk about, because we will get into it, I promise. And I'm going to try and get through as many topics as possible, Jeff, in this hour. The Seahawks are eliminated from the playoffs. I wanted to start with a few thoughts, Jeff. Apologies as I sort of explain my position before bringing you in and turning it over to you. But I have to say the reaction to getting eliminated from the playoffs and winning the Bears game last week has annoyed me a little bit. And when I judge where the Seahawks are as an organization, it isn't based on whatever prediction I made in the offseason. I said 10 wins. They may well get to 10 wins. It's not based on what I thought might happen before we see it play out, which was that probably the Niners would be much more competitive than they are. And maybe some of the teams that they've played this year would be more competitive than they have been. I judge my thoughts on the Seahawks right now based on whether I think this team is making clear progress to get to where everybody wants them to be. And that's competing for a championship in the future. That doesn't mean like next year, but just that I can feel like they're on the path to becoming a Super Bowl contender again. And what I see with this team right now is a team that has improved defensively. That's unquestioned. It's a good thing. The offense, though, is a mess. The offensive line, in particular, is a disaster. There's no long-term future at quarterback. They only have a 34-year-old Bridge who could end up with a $44.5 million cap hit by the end of next week. The offensive coordinator's going to likely be fired again. They've got 9 wins, Jeff, and only one of those 9 wins is against the team with a winning record. That's the 9-7 Denver Broncos, who were starting Bo Nix for the first time as a rookie on the road in week 1. The other wins were against Arizona twice, whatever remained left of the Niners when they beat them in Santa Clara, the Patriots, who are the number 1 overall pick right now, Miami without Tua, the Falcons, who are awful, the Bears, who are even worse, and the Jets. All of the wins aside from Denver, all of those teams are picking in the top 15 of the draft. And 5 of their opponents this year are picking in the top 11. They've beaten bad teams and they don't have a statement win. And their losses include a defeat to the putrid Giants at home, and then hefty home losses to the 49ers, Bills, and Packers. They've lost to all of the legit teams that they've faced. They've got an awful 3-6 record at home. That's a trend that's continued for far too long. It's now 2 NFC West titles in 10 years, 1 playoff win in 8 years. And the reaction that I've seen most, Jeff, I've nearly come to the end of this monologue. The reaction I've seen the most is kind of like to take satisfaction from, well, it's a 9-win season. It's a winning season. It's great that Mike Macdonald's had a winning season. It's wrong to sort of overreact to this or to reflect on where this franchise is. Jeff, I just don't think they're any closer this year to being a serious postseason threat. And I'd rather acknowledge that, talk about what they've got to do to improve and get to the next level, rather than just resort to what I think is quite a hollow, safe, comfortable position, which is to look for the positives within a season that has had some positives with the defense, but also doesn't really feel like it's kicked the franchise on, Jeff. And I want to discuss reasons why I think that later on, but I want to turn it over to you and get your reaction to that, whether you agree with some bits of that, disagree with some bits of that. Where are you at right now?
I think I'm mostly on the same page, but I think overall people really just are looking for some positives. And to me, like my expectation going into the year was really about Mike Macdonald and whether he was the guy. And I think there were a lot of positive developments on that front. I think taking the defense, which played, I looked it up today, they played the second hardest schedule based on DVOA of offensive opponents. And the Seahawks ended up taking one of the worst defensive units to a top 10. So that was a win. But I think if you're objectively analyzing the Seahawks and where they are, I think last week's game was a real kind of idea. Defensively, a lot of strides. There are some good things that happen. But so much of this league and sustainability and all the top teams have good offensive lines and reliable offenses. And you look at the Seahawks, the biggest disappointment this year was the offense got worse. And the worst part about it, we talked about Ryan Grubb all year. By the end of the Bears game, there was bad weather and Geno was clearly hurt, but it was just hard to see what they were even trying to accomplish. Like they were finally able to run the ball in the first half and then they couldn't pass. The whole year just felt broken. And so much of teams this year and where teams are going, and look at who's in the playoffs and who isn't, it's not just the quarterbacks, but it's a sustainable offensive system. And I think a lot of these issues, the offensive line just having a run game, could really fix. But until they fix that, so I think they did fix a lot of their defensive issues. I don't think they're an elite defense. I think I saw some people saying that. I think they would move to like the bottom of the top 10. I think against better teams, they had issues. But really good progress on defense. I liked a lot of what I saw from McDonald. But until you can get their offensive infrastructure situation figured out, and Gino is definitely a part of some of the issues we can talk about, but the infrastructure of the offense, that's been a recurring problem dating back to multiple coordinators. Really, you can say the last two coordinators weren't very good. Like we saw what happened with Shane Waldron and Bolton, but it just wasn't a matter of just if you drop in a play caller, it would have been different. There is an infrastructure issue here. And until that gets fixed, they're capped in what they can do. They can have the best defense they want, but they're capped. Detroit, Philadelphia, Minnesota yesterday, you saw it. They play very good, reliable offense. It's not Detroit and Minnesota have had the journeyman kind of quarterbacks. Tampa Bay, they switched coordinators. They lost Dave Canales. Everyone's like, well, you can't have a defensive head coach because they brought in Liam Cohn this year. Their offense got better. In Tampa Bay, if you watch Tampa Bay play offense in the second half of the year, they're one of the most fun offenses in the league. They're going to end up with the same amount of wins as Seattle, but going into the playoffs, I feel a lot better about being Tampa Bay than Seattle, and that's because of their offense. So I think there are some positives, and again, to me, this year was about McDonald, but I'm very much with you as if we're objectively analyzing this franchise, where they are, how they get out of this thing, until we can see a coherent plan of how they're going to fix their offense, whether that's why so much of it's like you want the offensive head coach because that's what they value, offensive infrastructure. And it leaves with a lot of questions. There aren't a lot of people who've gotten out of this path, and I could talk about if you want to, about it, like an example you can draw a parallel to, and I think you're going to like it, but there's not a lot of clear paths out of it. So I saw the stuff you said about kind of shaking this franchise up. I'm with you. Like until they have a clear and coherent plan on offense, it's hard to see a path out of this. Minnesota is probably the best. If you want to come to like a positive example, Kevin O'Connell's first year, they were kind of a fraudulent 10-12 win team. They had a negative point differential. But if you remember, they screwed up with their hiring of the defensive coordinator. They hired, I think his name was Ed Donatel. He was actually supposed to be on the Seahawks staff that year.
That's correct, yeah.
And they stunk. They got beat by Daniel Jones in the playoffs. They were kind of a fraudulent team. It took them until, you know what they did? Instead of paying Kirk Cousins, it took them 2 years later. Instead of paying Kirk Cousins $45 million, you know what they did? They got Darnold for $10 million. You just wrote that article today. They'd spent the surplus on Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, Stephon Gilmore, and they extended, I think, Kristen Darisaw. That they took the path you're talking about, and they went from they were a 7-9 win team last year. They became a 13-14 win team. It's a very hard path to replicate, but I think it's very reflective of where the Seahawks are. If they run it back with Kirk Cousins, don't do anything else, they would have been screwed this year. And I think the Seahawks, on one hand, they did have a positive season, but they need to fix this offense, and it's not a simple fix. And so I'm with you. If you just run this thing back, say we're going to get a guard in free agency, we're going to figure it out, that's a bleak path forward, man.
I think you made some great points there. And let me be clear that I am not negative about Mike Macdonald, if anybody's thinking that. I think Mike Macdonald's done a tremendous job with the defense. And I don't think it should be underestimated. I don't think the Seahawks have to have a top 3 defense in the NFL to say Mike Macdonald's done a good job. The defense stunk for years. It was an actual embarrassment. And then when you watch it this season, it has been far better. Now, there's something, somebody asked me to put a talking point out there later on about the defense. We'll come back to that. But I think Macdonald's done a good job. But I do, the one question mark I have with him, Jeff, is kind of what you're talking about there. I think the success of Mike Macdonald broadly as a head coach and whether the Seahawks can take the next step is going to be solely down to his ability to appoint a top offensive coordinator.
Yep.
It's going to come down to that. And they have failed with Ryan Grubb Now, what this can't be, we can't be sat here in a year and go, well, the replacement for Ryan Grubb failed as well. Now they've got to go and look for somebody else. And this is like an annual thing of trying to find somebody to do it. What I've learned from this year is I think Mike McDonald is very much a hands-on defensive mastermind, and he will look after the defense, but he wants a head coach to run the offense, essentially. Yeah. And appointing somebody who never coached in the NFL before to do that job was a bad idea. Now they've got to go and get somebody who can be essentially the head coach of the offense. Yep. And if they can get that right, that's first. I think that comes before even things like fixing the offensive line. You have got to get the right person in to run this offense. And why, my word, that's such an important appointment. And in 7 days' time, Jeff, Ryan Grubb's probably not going to be in a job anymore. And that search will begin if it's not already begun. And now we'll talk a bit more about that. But I think that is the single foremost, most important thing. This will only work with McDonald, in my opinion, if you get a great offensive coordinator. And by the way, if you get that great offensive coordinator and they are great, like Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay, you might only have them for a year. Yeah. So that's the other thing you've got to live with. So that is the dilemma of having the defensive-minded head coach, and it's the thing that Minnesota won't necessarily have to worry about. Exactly. They might have to replace Brian Flores, but they're never going to have to worry about replacing Kevin O'Connell.
Yep, and we talked about it, the whole coaching search, and unfortunately Ben Johnson pulled out of the search, and it remains to be seen. We will find out if he gets hired this cycle, if he was a good coach, but Bobby Slowick, a guy I was really excited about, this looks like a whiff for me. He took a massive step back and was one of the worst OCs in the NFL this year. And you saw what happened to that offense once teams figured out their protection schemes. So there weren't a lot of options for the Seahawks. I think really the McDonald route was really the only way they could go. Dan Quinn's had a pretty good year, but Cliff Kingsbury turned out to be a pretty good appointment. And I wouldn't have thought that at first, but he's done a really good job adjusting, and their offense really picked up. So I think you nailed exactly. Some head coaches, they don't know much about offense, but they still, I do get the sense from McDonald, he wants someone who's going to run that show. He's going to stay out of it. I would have liked him to kind of get involved a little more this year even. That would be a criticism I have of him. It just seemed like he come out of so many games be like, well, we didn't run the ball. Like, why weren't you part of that plan? And so I'll be shocked if Grubb isn't fired by next Sunday or next week. Probably next Monday or not. But I don't know. I don't know their process and how long they're going to take things. But you're right. For the McDonald thing to work, they have to get this right. And that's why defensive head coaches are risks at this point. Like Jim Harbaugh came in, he's not really an offensive or a defensive guy, but you know what his team's going to look like. Their team looked like it on both sides of the ball right away. We don't know what Mike McDonald's offense is going to look like and how much of it comes down to the coordinator hire. So he needs to get this right. He needs to be in. I think the timing really put him in a bad spot. And like if Arthur Smith's there, maybe we get an offense that makes sense and the whole thing might work. But this is what I mean by offensive infrastructure. You need someone who's setting the tone. You need someone to come into the building and say, we need to get this offensive line fixed. Or I'm not taking this job unless we're prioritizing the offensive line. And they got to get this right. If they try to just draft a guy in the third round, see if it works, find a cheap free agent, if they try to do that, they're going to fail. Like we've seen this fail too many times. I have no confidence. They need to kind of start because you look at the offense, it fell apart. And you're right. McDonald can do everything he wants on defense. If the offense is crap, they're never going to get out of the cycle.
So let's move on to Ryan Grubb and that offensive coordinator hire, because that's the direction we've gone in here. So I suspect, like I said, this time next week, Jeff, if we're doing one next week, we'll be talking probably about Grubb being fired, or it'll happen very early next week, I think. And sort of my guess, I'm reading the tea leaves on this, Jeff, is that Jake Peets is going to be the next defensive coordinator. Mike McDonald name dropped Peets amongst a list of coaches last week that had helped him sort of handle, I think it was the schedule around the Christmas game and how to do that. And I thought it was interesting that he name dropped him there. It just seems to me a little bit as if Like, you keep hearing his name getting mentioned. I was listening to Brock Heward talking today, and he was talking like, oh, maybe Jake Peets is going to be quite keen on becoming a coordinator and moving on and doing play calling again. And I just get the sense that one, maybe McDonald and Peets, this is a pure guess. I'm not saying this based on anything other than a guess, and I'm pretty sure I could be completely wrong, that they've struck up an accord, that they have developed a relationship that maybe McDonald and Grubb has not, that maybe they feel like they're both on the same page in a way that Grubb and McDonald is not. And then the other thing I would say is that, Kevin O'Connell's done such an amazing job. It has, and then you look at Liam Cohen, and it has reinforced the idea, I think, again, that the McVay coaching tree is one worth tapping into. Now, I know that Shane Waldron has been an absolute disaster in 2 spots, and that will make people wary. But at the moment, he is the exception to the rule. Like, everybody else seems to work. So I don't think we should be put off the McVay tree simply because of Shane Waldron. They've had a year with Pete. It's not a complete unknown like with Waldron. He is a McVay protege. And if McDonald looks at what Sean McVay has done and what Kevin O'Connell has done and what Liam Cohen has done and thinks Jake Peets can bring that to Seattle, I think there's a very good chance that they will just make Jake Peets the next defensive coordinator. And he has been a coordinator for LSU. That's college, but he has been around the NFL for a long time. He's been like a run game coordinator as well as not just a passing game coordinator. So my guess would be that. However, if they aren't just automatically going to promote from within, Jeff, and I also think, by the way, that that's very likely because I don't think they want to tear everything apart on the offense. I think they do want some, even if it's just a consistency in terms of voices and people in the building, they might want some crossover. But if they do want to go outside, you mentioned in a tweet earlier, Josh McCown. Now, I was doing the radio broadcast in the UK on that game yesterday, and there was 2 things that struck me during the game. One was how well Sam Darnold played. Not flawless, but played well.
Yeah.
And the other thing was how freaking close O'Connell and McCown were throughout that game. They were like best buds. Like, they were stood there laughing and joking when the big plays were happening, when the touchdown was scoring. It was McCown and O'Connell together, jollying it up on the sideline. Like, they are like that. And I couldn't help but think, I want the person who has been next to Kevin O'Connell like that all year. Now, I don't know whether there's any chance Josh McCown wants to take an offensive coordinator job in Seattle next season. He might not. He might think I'm better off staying here in Minnesota, or he may even get a head coaching offer. But you tweeting that, Jeff, I have to say, there was part of me thinking, if you're going to take a risk on anybody, and if you want to tap into what's working around the league, McCown seems like somebody who you'd be worth taking a shot
on. I watched the game and had the same thought, man. I had heard just from other people that he has a really big role in that building that no one talks about. I know, like, Wade Phillips' son is their OC. He's the designer of the offense. But I heard McCown's the guy who's really worked with Darnold and really played a big role in his development. The question, obviously, with McCown is he's never been a play caller at really the NFL level. He's never called plays, but he's been a quarterback at the NFL level. So many of the best coaches in the NFL have been quarterbacks. That's their background. They know more about calling games. There's not a lot of quarterbacks that have. And McCown and the Seahawks really, like, we can talk about Geno Smith and the offensive line. The Seahawks need someone who can develop quarterbacks. I think that is so important. I think that's puts him on a head coaching track. I think if you're going to be in Minnesota, you're never going to be able to call plays. You're never going to be able to. You're always going to be. But that really hasn't hurt people because McVay's guys, LaFleur, O'Connell, Waldron got a job. Peets is getting promoted. There's Zach Taylor. So a lot of them get opportunities. But I think McCown for the next step of his coaching career, and there was talk a couple of years ago, Houston thought so much of him. They were willing to make him a head coach, and I think there was so much backlash they had to stop. But that's the kind of brain he's regarded as. So you're right. Ideally, after what happened this year, you probably would want a more experienced play caller. But if I'm willing to, again, I have the same thing as you. I think I've heard enough good things. I think I saw the same thing you did. He was very prominent all over that sideline. I've heard Darnold talk about him. And the fact that Sam Darnold's gone from basically like a backup quarterback to one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this year. The guy who's around him, the quarterback coach, I think you got to keep a close eye on that. So, and I think a quarterback would obviously have a very strong opinion about Seattle's offensive line. So the Pete's thing is obviously going to be interesting because if they've had a whole year to have a working relationship. We don't know what his offense would be. I assume his offense would look pretty different than Grubb's. I'd be curious who his offensive line coach would be. I think that's going to be a huge hire, because so much of what like O'Connell does is they have answers to protections, and they don't have the best offensive line talent. They lost their left tackle for the season. Everyone thought it was going to ruin them. Christian Darrisaw went out. He's one of the best left tackles in the league. And yesterday at the end of the game, it struck me, and that's why I would wonder about McCown as like an exciting option. They need 4 plays to like ice the game yesterday. Green Bay made that great comeback. I think 2 of them were like wide open play action passes to the flat. And I was watching the Seahawks the other night, or the Bears the other night. And anytime they just needed a basic play in a big spot, they either had the wrong, in my opinion, the wrong play call or just no answer. And the fact that McVay just like schemed not McVay, O'Connell, they just had like, how many coaches in that spot would have just run 3 times into the line, punted the ball, tried to win with defense? And they had great play calls, I thought, in that spot. They moved the quarterback. They had that rollout to Jefferson where he came across, and then the play to Cam Akers in the flat. And I'm like, God, I want someone on that coaching staff. I love how they call the game. And then I saw McCown all throughout the day. And then I think Brady mentioned it on their broadcast. And Kevin Burkhardt said, the players in the building just rave about this guy. So he would be on my list. He would be high on my list of guys I'd want to interview.
Well, here's the other thing is there are so many parallels. Like Sean McVay didn't call plays until he went to LA.
Yeah.
Succeeded. Kevin O'Connell didn't call plays until he went to Minnesota. He succeeded. Josh McCown hasn't called plays, but maybe he will also succeed. Kevin O'Connell, former quarterback in the NFL, has succeeded. McCown, very similar, former NFL quarterback. Like you say, people have been raving about him. And if you are going to develop a quarterback, and you are going to have to develop one, whatever happens with Geno Smith, and I think we'll move on to Geno next, but whatever happens there, Jeff, very, very soon, you're going to have to develop a quarterback, whether that's a reclamation project or a rookie. You want someone who's got a track record of developing a quarterback. And if he has played a big role in Sam Darnold's resurgence this year, it's a good option to have. And look, maybe you can keep Jake Peets. He's contracted to Seattle. It's not as if he's either the offensive coordinator or he goes. Maybe it can be a Peets McCown team, to come in and do that. That would be exciting, Jeff. Doesn't mean it's going to work. No, what guarantee is there with these things? There never is. But it just feels as if that could be an exciting direction for this team. And when I put the tweet out yesterday saying, the franchise needs a jolt, and people are going, what does that mean? Like Puck was trying to guess. He means fire Schneider. And other people are like, what do you mean? Do you mean like get rid of Mike McDonald? It's like, no. A jolt can mean whatever you want it to mean. That would be a jolt for me. Going and landing Josh McCown and making a statement like that, I think that's interesting. Fixing your offensive line's a jolt. Actually saying, hey, do you know what? We're going to spend $15, $20 million on a guard. That'd be a jolt.
Yeah.
Like changing your quarterback, that'd be a jolt. Like it doesn't mean firing the GM. It doesn't mean firing the head coach. It can be anything you want it to mean. What the franchise needing a jolt means is not sitting there and going, yay, 9 wins. Well done, everybody. You didn't make the playoffs again. You've not won the NFC West for 8 of the last 10 years. Like that, do something. Let's see something that makes you sort of believe again. And they did that with a coaching change a year ago. I want to see another seismic change, Jeff. I want to see something that you can feel like, okay, this is a franchise that's taking things seriously. And I think if they fire Ryan Grubb, which they will, and go and get someone like McCown, that'd be interesting. The only downside, of course, is you're watching Minnesota. They might be the number 1 seed. They might be in the NFC Championship. They might be in the Super Bowl. How on earth are you going to be able to appoint Josh McCown if he's coaching all the way through to February? I mean, if you wanted him that badly, can you get any kind of deal done with him? I don't think you can. You've kind of got to wait the whole process out. And are other candidates going to get snapped up between then? Are you going to feel the pinch to go and get somebody else? Do you just sort of sit on, well, if we can't get him, we'll just turn to Pete's instead? I mean, maybe that's what they would do. But I would love to see a really ambitious hire. And look, McCown might not have called plays before, but he's played quarterback in the NFL and he's been on the best offensive staff in the league. with the exception of maybe Sean McVay's staff. So I'm down for that, Jeff. And I think that would be the kind of change that would be the jolt that they need.
And you got to see what I don't want to just talk about the Vikings because it's a really hard team to replicate what they've done, but they were in the same spot as the Seahawks are, where they had Kirk Cousins year after year after year. And obviously they had a much better offensive infrastructure with their offensive line being further along. But I knew one of the guys I watch football with every week. He's a Vikings fan. And for years, he was complaining to me that, like, they need to move off this guy. And I'm like, well, who are you going to get? You're like 9 wins, 10 wins every year. Like, who are you going to get? And I gave him crap for years. I'm like, okay, it's easy to say you don't want him, but there's 10 other teams that would want him. And we saw that play out. He got $45 million. But they moved off him. And obviously their plan was J.J. McCarthy, and Darnold was a stopgap. But that gave that team the jolt. If you have Kirk Cousins on this team right now, they're not 13, 14, and 2. That was the jolt that changed their franchise. And I'm not saying if they go out and replace Geno, all of a sudden everything will be fixed. But we've seen this work where if you put the right infrastructure in place, we've seen it with Baker Mayfield in Tampa. They lost Tom Brady. They seem screwed for the foreseeable future. They've been a more fun team since Baker got there. So I'm not saying like Geno's the problem, but they're going to have to take a fork in the road. And if you have to take a risk on something, whether that's the OC, whether that's the quarterback, we all know they got to fix the offensive line. No matter who comes back, no matter who the quarterback is, that goes without saying. Until they get that done, their offense is not going to be sustainable. It's going to be a problem every year. But they're going to have to take a risk somewhere. They can't just be like, well, like really this team should have won 11 games this year. That's 100%. But there's a but. They're no closer to being a Super Bowl contender. They should have won this crappy NFC. It's a joke the Rams won the NFC West. They suck. That game on Saturday was an embarrassment that they won that game. The Cardinals are a joke.
No, the both teams were awful.
The fact that the Cardinals didn't know to run the ball from that spot was pathetic. But what a kick in the nuts that was for anyone who spent their time watching it like I did. But yeah, they should have won this division. But really, what does that mean? Like, it would have been fun to watch a playoff game, sure. But the goal is bigger than that. You don't want to be the team that makes the playoffs every year and gets thrown out in the first round like the end of the Russell Wilson era. The whole reason Mike McDonald was in was to take this team to the next level. And so if anyone's scared of change, or you're just living under a rock, man.
Jeff, they are scared of change. There are so many people clinged to Pete Carroll. There were people after Carroll was fired, like decrying the Seahawks for it's too soon. He deserved another year. The guy had been in charge for 14 seasons or whatever it was. Like it was time to move on. People couldn't bring themselves to consider the thought that Russell Wilson might be traded. People who were talking about it were insane or had mental health issues. That's the kind of message I used to get every week for talking about this. The minute he was traded, I had like people like Joe Fan messaging me going, this is unbelievable how much grief we got for 2 years talking about this. And it happened. And now everyone's going to have to eat how ridiculous they were about this. And it was true. Like, people cannot bring themselves to move on. It's like there are certain aspects of the franchise that just act like a comfort blanket. And I don't really understand it. As somebody who, as somebody who works in the media and therefore is passionate about the media, and I think I've said this to you before, I watch a lot of Boston sports media, not because I'm interested in the Patriots and stuff like that. I'm just fascinated how they approach topics and how their fans relate to their teams. And it is so different to what is in the Pacific Northwest. I find that really interesting. It's very different how it is to England as well. Like in England, you could win, have a setback, and people will have a serious discussion about what on earth happened in that loss. Like in Seattle, it's like 9 wins. It's cool. It's okay. Not made the playoffs. It's great. I find that frustrating. And the Geno Smith thing is very interesting because the minute you bring anything up about Geno Smith, there are people on Twitter in the media, like I've seen it today, like Michael Sean Dugar and Quandre Diggs were laughing it up about, who's better than Geno Smith? Like Corbin Smith will often say, like, who's better than Geno Smith? Tell me, there's nobody out there better. Like Brock Hewitt did, and Brady Henderson did a piece today. Like Brock Hewitt's very much in the, you're not going to get anybody better than Geno Smith conversation. And I just sort of sat there and I thought, I want to write about this. And I did write this article today where is that just the autopilot default answer that people think that it should be? Like, is there a discussion to be had here that people aren't? And the main reason for it is there's a decent chance that Geno Smith will hit 3 escalators in this game. All he needs is 185 yards against the Rams to get $2 million and hit the yardage escalator. If they win the game against presumably the Rams backups, that's another $2 million. And if he completes 62% of his passes, I mean, he could screen pass his way. You could get to the line, Jeff, and call 18 screen passes in the game and audible to them at the line of scrimmage to make $2 million. If I was Geno Smith, I would probably do that in a game that didn't mean anything if I could get $2 million. So he's going to get the 62.2% of his passes to get the $2 million. So that if he does all those 3 things, his cap hit next year is $44.5 million. And you might say, well, it doesn't matter that he wouldn't play on that. They would do a new deal with him. But one, that connects you to Geno Smith beyond 2025, which you may or may not want to do. 2, Albert Breer thinks his team wants some like big statement commitment contract, which is not going to come. So that could make things dicey over the coming months. And 3, Brock Heward and Brady Henderson were talking about this earlier, that having a $44.5 million cap hit next year will be the floor for negotiations, so that his camp will be able to go, well, we're due this, we'll play for that next year. We're going to make you cut him if you don't want to pay him that, and we'll go to the market. I mean, I think that'd be a foolish thing for them to do, but they might threaten that as leverage. And then you get into a debate where you're talking to a quarterback where $44.5 million next year is like some kind of bargaining tool that is legitimate for the quarterback. That's not an ideal place to be. And then you actually look at the fact that nobody viewed Sam Darnold as a great option a year ago when he's become what he's become. Nobody was really clamoring for Baker Mayfield when he was available and he went to the Bucs. Nobody was clamoring for Geno Smith when he became Seattle's starter. Like, can you go out there and get a quarterback for, let's say, between $5 and $10 million dollars, not pounds, dollars, cut Geno Smith and save $31 million, Jeff, which, I don't know about you, I quite like the idea of having $31 million to spend on the offensive line. And is it beyond the realms of possibility that you could end up with a quarterback? Let me just read some stats out for you from the article. You could get a quarterback who might be able to at least match these numbers. Geno Smith, 19th for touchdowns, 21st for QBR, 18th for quarterback rating. Prior to this week, his quarterback rating under pressure, 26th, 5th in the NFL for turnover-worthy plays. I think he's level with Will Levis there. 2nd for interceptions. His time to throw, 2.83 seconds, is only 14th in the league. It's in the middle of the pack. It's not extremely it's not ridiculously bad. He's only been sacked 2 more times than Sam Darnold. A large chunk of his league-leading 243 pressures come from a really terrible period of like 4 or 5 games where Stone Forsythe and Mike Jarrell decided they were going to try and set a new world record for pressures given up in a month. And since the Munich game in 2022, which is kind of the final game of his hot start in that first year as a starter, he has thrown 52 touchdowns and 32 interceptions, which is a 13-8 ratio, if you want to put it that way, which is bad. And the Seahawks are 20-19 with him under center. Jeff, the idea that you cannot match those numbers at a far cheaper price is bollocks.
I know. And that's like, if we were just looking at like who's the best guy who's going to produce at 2025, it's Geno. It's the best bet. But it's a complicated situation. And the Breer thing is really what kind of put me over the top on my opinion on this. And I would not. There's no chance I would even consider that. And I when you're making a bet on a quarterback, you're projecting what they're going to be. And if you put that much into the quarterback spot at Geno, that just becomes, I think at the end of the day, like, Geno has some good skills. He's a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. It's just too much of the play is mediocre. And I'm tired of watching. And the problem is they've set him up to fail. I understand that. I will strongly go with that take. But a 35-year-old quarterback at that point of his career, it's not a good bet. The Vikings made the same call. They backed away from Kirk Cousins. And I don't think all of a sudden Geno's going to come off an Achilles injury. And Geno is a good quarterback. If you can get it back at $20 million, $25 million, I'm doing that. But if you have to pay this guy $40 million, it's a no for me. And I think you can get a bargain. I think that's the bet John Schneider got lucky on. I think they wanted Drew Lock. They thought they could get similar production that Russell got. Russell's become a diminished. You've seen what happened with Russell the last month against good teams. He looks like a diminished guy. And so, yeah, if I can take my bet and be like, okay, I'm going to try to find a guy for $10, $15 million. I'm really going to try to build an infrastructure. And if it doesn't work, we can keep drafting quarterbacks. I would do that. I don't see the point of paying more money and creating yourself in a bigger hole just to be in purgatory. I think it's nonsense. And I think some teams, if the Seahawks had a great offensive line, and we've seen Geno produce with a great offensive line, then great, give him the money. But do you want to become the Dolphins with Tua? Like, Tua's a much younger player, but they paid the guy $50 million because he had a good statistical season. They're capped out as a 9-10 win team that can't do anything in the playoffs. I don't want to become that. Paying more money to become that team, to me, is a non-starter. There's no way. I think the only way I'm comfortable with Geno is if you're probably playing out the last year, or you find a way to lower the cap hit with incentives. This idea of him as a floor for 4, I didn't hear that conversation today. That would have made my head pop out. Because that's not, and look, we've seen a lot of guys in the last few years. Darnold, Baker, they've gotten the right infrastructure. So if you can get a guy for half the price and just kind of build the system around him, that's a route I'm willing to take until you draft that quarterback. I don't see the point of having a mid-level bridge quarterback that's getting paid like a stud. I think that turns you into a team that has no ceiling.
Well, I just think that Geno Smith at $7 million or whatever he cost in 2022 was fantastic. And it was a great story. He had a 30 touchdown season. That was great. And then he costs a little bit more the following year. And the stats come down a little bit. And you think, oh, okay. And then you get to this year and the price goes up again. And the stats come down again. And you're thinking, okay, like he's getting more expensive every year. And the production's getting a little bit lower. I do think with Geno Smith, you were always going to have this, because this is what he's been. In his 3 seasons at the starter in Seattle and in his final year at West Virginia, he has a good stretch of the season and a bad stretch of the season. That's how he is. And the good stretch will always have people thinking, this guy's legit. This guy's brilliant. This guy's amazing. And there will be times, Jeff, when that's a really convincing argument. There were certain games at the start of this season where you thought, if they didn't have Geno Smith, they'd have lost that game. Yeah, like he was the difference on the day. Like there was a few games like that where that happened. But then what has happened in every single season, and it's happened again this year, is you've got to the end of the season and you've started to think, I think Geno cost that game against the Rams, though, that interception for return for a touchdown. I think Geno Smith played quite badly against the Bears. Like his time to throw against the Bears was one of his best. That was
the worst game he's played in 2 years.
That was one of the best time to throw averages that he had all season against the Bears. And it had these, by far, his worst PFF grade. Like it was in the 40s for the Bears game.
That was fair.
It was, and you look at that and you think, this is who he is. There's always just enough to make you think you can't move on from this guy. But then there's always just enough that kind of makes you think you should do. And while that's going on, the price goes up all the time. And I'm getting to the point now, Jeff, where I kind of feel like this has run its course. Like if he is willing to be a cost-effective bridge, that's fine. I'm with you. If he is a cost-effective bridge, it's not worth, I think you said like if it was $20 million or something like that, then it's not worth saving, say, $10 million to see if Zach Wilson can be the guy instead or somebody like that. But the minute you start talking about, his cap hit might be $35 million next year, or that he might have an average contract over the next 3 years of $40 million, I'm starting to think, hang on a minute, maybe they should try and find the next Sam Darnold. Maybe there is somebody out there who was drafted in the top 5 who's just got stuck on the Jets roster and needs a better team and franchise and a better coach to get it out of him. And we're talking about Josh McCown, saying to Josh McCown or somebody like that, we're gonna challenge you to go and make the next Sam Darnold, and then it working. I mean that the value of that. And the other thing I wrote in the article, Jeff, was I think more than ever now, one of the big game changers with the NFL is value at quarterback. It's, do you get a rookie like the Commanders have got, where they will get now 4 years of an unbelievable value. They're already an 11-win team. What can they do with that roster now with Jaden Daniels on that rookie contract? The Commanders fans will be salivating at the thought. And then the other thing is, can you get somebody like the Vikings have done, which enables you to do what they've done this year? It's like if you don't have Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, who is freaking unbelievable, by the way. I mean, that performance of the day was. I wanted to become. I'm joking. I want to watch that guy every week. Like that, what a player. What a player. He's the best. I agree with his coach. He's the best player on the planet right now. And, unless you have those players, I think NFL franchises, you have to look yourself in the mirror and go, we need to have a cost-effective situation at quarterback. And the Dolphins and the Falcons and the Jaguars, Jeff, they have cocked this up by taking on massive quarterback salaries for no benefit. And I really don't want the Seahawks to do that. I want the Seahawks to be ahead of the game, ahead of the curve, finding value, finding ways to get the production that they're getting now at a minimum at a much cheaper price. And that means, I'm afraid, considering moving on from Geno Smith, saving $31 million next year, pumping that into your offensive line, getting some proper guards and centers and whatever, so that you're not having to rely on rookies like they did with Christian Haynes. And if that means taking a chance at quarterback, Jeff, and even risking regressing at the position, I'm down for it. I'm down for it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like watching the Bears game, it could have been clear to me. Like, obviously, that was Geno's worst game of the year, and he's banged up for sure. But when I heard that Brewer report, I just couldn't get that idea out of my head. It's just like there's a ceiling to what he can do, and I think there's just too many times where he tries to make the most difficult. Robert Mays talks about this a lot. Robert Mays is one of the most pro Geno guys you'll find, and Geno's done a lot of incredible things this year, and but he makes offense more difficult than it needs to be a lot of the time because he tries to make the most, either has too much confidence or he's kind of going for almost the hardest throw, and he'll pass up easy throws sometimes. And it's not like Russell used to be where he just doesn't see it. I think it's just who Geno is. He's got a ton of confidence. He's got an incredible arm. When he makes a great throw, there are few people that can throw the ball as pure as him. John Middlecoff talks about this a lot. If you got a guy to run a post route, Geno would be the best guy at a lot of these NFL quarterbacks. But just consistency from down to down and the turnovers thing, you can recreate that, what he does, and you can recreate the production at a much lower cost. And if you don't have the dude, I just keep taking shots. And to me, I just think there's a ceiling. And if the Seahawks had different infrastructure where they had a proven play caller and they had a proven O-line, you can sell me on the Geno thing a lot easier. If they had the system to make it work, they don't. There's a lot of questions there. So to add to that problem, as their offense is a problem right now, by just putting more money into the quarterback, sure, it could get worse. Maybe you take a step back, but is that really the worst thing? I think what you want to do is maybe you take a shot on a guy, see if he's cheaper, see if it works. If it doesn't, draft a guy. Or do it at the same time. This isn't a great quarterback, but the next year, if you take a step back, you can draft a guy. And so for me, I was thinking the same thing just watching football this week and watching all the teams and seeing how many bad quarterbacks there were. Geno is a top 15 quarterback. He's in that 12 to 15 range, in my opinion. If you're going to have a guy like that, you got to have him at the right price point, or else your team can't really grow. And the Seahawks just have too many holes. And so I'm willing, if I was Schneider, I would be willing to rip the Band-Aid off. He seemed hesitant last year even. He was talking about Drew Lock, and he was talking about bring back Drew Lock, and we got to do this. And Geno felt disrespected. Brady even talked about these rumors when he sat out in training camp. It's because he was pissed off. So there's been kind of a rocky relationship with the front office. I think seeing this year has given John enough ammo to be like, okay, we can't pay this guy what he thinks he's worth. That's my opinion. And if I was doing it, I would take a shot on someone else. I would see if you can. It's going to be hard to find the next Darnold or the next Baker, but I would take the shot. I think it's worth the ceiling. It gives you a floor. I just don't. I think if worst case it bottoms out, then you're in position to draft your next guy. So I think the risk reward is pretty good there. I don't see I think the alternative of paying him $45 million Brock Huard's talking about, I think that's a disaster scenario.
Well, what I would say is that, and I think this is the thing, what have you got to lose, really, Jeff? What have you got to lose? Oh no, we might not have another 9 or 10 win season and not make the playoffs. You're not suggesting moving on from Joe Burrow here. Like you're suggesting moving on from a third. He's going to be 35 next season. He's got
Kirk
17.
Cousins.
He's Kirk Cousins. He's got 17 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. He's going to be a year older next season. He's been injured for the last. He's injured now. He's playing with an injury. He was injured at the end of last season. Like it. What are we actually saying? What are you risking here? And if you go for it, and if the GM comes out and says afterwards, we've got to turn over every step. We've got to look for a long-term answer at quarterback. I think most fans would go, well, fair enough. And then let's say that I'm just using Zach Wilson because he's just an easy person to throw their name into that. I don't know who mentioned it earlier. Was it Albert Breer or somebody who brought that name up? Like one of the reporters mentioned that he would be worth a shot in this regard. If you turn it over to him, Jeff, and he's awful next year, you're going to be in a position where the draft options next year, I mean, this gets said every year, and I'm one of the people who pushes back from this the most, but I actually think there might be some legitimacy to next year's quarterback class being a lot more interesting than maybe the last couple have been. Does Drew Aller take a step forward? Does Garrett Nussmeier take a step forward? Is Arch Manning going to be in the draft? You've got interesting players who could develop next year and actually be quite interesting. If it doesn't work out, well, then you draft somebody. If you just crack on and have another 9-win season next year, we're just going to be having the same conversation again in 12 months' time because they're probably not going to be able to draft a quarterback in the next draft. So actually just doing something differently. And do you know what? If you take on a Zach Wilson and he plays really great and you have like a Josh McCown or even if it's Jake Peets and then you turn him into the next Donald, Jeff, and you think, actually, I'm quite happy to give him like a Baker Mayfield type contract or something, then so what? Then you found a young guy who's 25 who can maybe provide a bit of a solution for you while you're going through this process. I mean, like to me, it just makes more sense to consider this. And I'm not saying definitely do it, but I'm really, really bored of every time you bring up the idea of switching off quarterbacks or even want to have a conversation about it. There's somebody to say you can't do that. There's no way you could get better than Geno Smith. Like laugh out loud in a tweet. Oh, you can't possibly do this. Like no. Like it should be a talking point amongst fans. Even if ultimately your position is keep Geno Smith, it should be talked about. So that I think I'm glad that we're having that conversation. I actually think, by the way, on John Schneider, I think he would be very prepared to move off and do something different. I wonder if Mike McDonald has a different opinion because he's a defensive-minded head coach. He's probably thinking, this offense isn't very good. Is changing coordinator and the quarterback and the whole offensive line doable in an offseason? Like he might want some crossover, some consistency there. And I'd love to be a fly on the wall when they talk about what they're going to do. But what I would say is John Schneider's going to have the final say on this. Like he is the person making the big decisions. And I think Mike McDonald will have to live with whatever he decides. So we will see. There's still loads of things I want to get through. We're already 48 minutes in and we've got a bunch of super chats, some of them extremely generous. So I want to get to these first. Apologies. Niazul, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Appreciate what you do, Rob. Keep up the good work. Couple of things. How much pressure should Snyder be under? And B, I don't think anyone with a brain can stomach another Geno season. So thank you. I really appreciate the super chat. I think we've touched on Geno. Let's get to A on that, Jeff. How much pressure should John Schneider be under? Should his position, even only after a year after appointing Matt McDonald, should that be talked about more than it is?
Yes, there should be a mandate from ownership about their offensive line. It's been too long. They have not solved this problem. And it's the worst part is it's the most sustainable part of football. And we saw Harbaugh come in. And so there should be a mandate from his bosses being like, if this isn't fixed, we're going to fire you. I think John Schneider's done a lot of good things in the draft in the last 3. I think his last 3 drafts have been good. But this is about team building. And his free agency was god-awful last year. But I think again, a lot of this just comes down to they don't not only do they not identify talent well, they just don't seem to have a coherent plan of how to fix it. And until he does that, it should be under pressure. Because of the way Carroll was transitioned and this became John Schneider's team, and they still won 10 games, and I think they're a little of a less traditional ownership group. I think John's pretty safe. I think he's I think it's an easy sell. Like, look, it's a first-year head coach. We had a first-year play caller. It didn't work out. Like, we're going to fix that. But he should be under pressure to get that offensive line figured out. If I was talking to Burkhold or Jody, I would say I would lay it out I would kind of slam my fist down. If this isn't solved, you're fired.
I would completely agree. I think
Yeah.
there has to be some pressure applied. You have got to get this sorted. And I would also add, I think the offense has to be in a totally different place.
Yes.
I'd be excited about the offense next season. Fix O-line, consider everything at quarterback, get offensive coordinators who can get this going. I would definitely apply that pressure. And I hope they will. I mean, I was surprised. I was surprised. I was pleased that they moved on from Pete Carroll, because I thought, I think we all had a doubt as whether they would ever do that, and they did.
Yeah, seriously.
So let's see if they can do something similar with this. Neozor's sent another one in to add on, really looking at the 2022 draft class. Are any of them worth re-signing? Cross has been meh, Maffei solid, K9 is injury prone and dances too much, and Reek is overrated amongst the 12s heavily. I think that's an interesting conversation, Jeff, that as we get into the offseason is going to become a talking point. Like how much is Charles? I think moving on from Charles Cross is difficult because he's not terrible. He's not replacement level. He's just not great. But I don't want to pay him a great contract just because he happens to be the next left tackle ready for a contract. And I fear that's what could happen. So I don't really know what you do there. Maybe you just take the fifth-year option and kick the can down the road. Boya Maffei, I think, I think solid's the right word. He's not dominant, but he's solid. I mean, I'd rather have Boya Maffei than not. But again, I don't want to pay him an elite contract. Hopefully there'll be a compromise there. But he is coming up to his contract year now. I watch Bijan Robinson and Saquon and these players, Jeff, and every time I watch them, I think, why the hell is Ken Walker not closer to these guys in terms of production and stuff? And part of it is the health, but he's got everything he needs to be a top running back in the NFL. And after 3 years, he's not got close to that. And it bothers me a little bit. And I don't know what to do with him. And Reek Woolen, my goodness. Like, for the one good game in every 4 that he has, I'm not down with the nonsense that comes with him, Jeff. I don't mind them keeping him for another year and then watching him sail off into the sunset, and maybe they get a comp pick for him or something. But I am not paying him a big... The thought of Reek Woolen with a lot of money in his wallet scares me in a bad way. So what do you make of the 2022 guys?
Yeah, when you really look at those names, it's a lot of talent, but there's not a lot of guys I would determine as like a building block player. Cross, you're probably going to have to resign. I think you're going to have to come to grips with that because they have so many issues on their offensive line right now. They can't really create another one, especially at the most important position. So I would take the fifth-year option with him, just kind of kick that can, see if he gets better. I think they're going to have a new O-line coach next year, see if that gets better. But I think at some point you're going to have to come to grips. Maffei's a tricky one because, again, he's a good rotational. He's not a rotational player, but he's a good, like, number 2 pass rusher. He's not the dude. Like, you can still see they have a bit of an edge rush hole. They're good. Him and Hall are a really solid duo, but you still, even when Chenna plays, you can see Chenna's like the guy in that group. So I'd play out the last year of his contract as well. Walker, I would trade. And I really like Kenneth Walker, but he's injured too much, and he's too much of a dancer right now. And again, we saw what happened with Saquon and Derrick Henry when they got to good offensive infrastructures. They're probably the two. Like, Saquon went from being a good back to a 2,000-yard rusher. Kenneth Walker has been on a team that doesn't have good run blocking, and has been on with coordinators that don't like running the ball. So it's been a pretty awful situation for him in terms of maximizing his potential. Because when he's going, he's a damn good player. He's super talented. But this infrastructure is just not set up. And for a position that we saw what happened with when we had Charbonnet and McIntosh, the running game looked fine, even good. And so it's unfortunate because Walker should be a top 5 back. And it's a combination of injuries, and he dances a little much, but I think it really comes down to they haven't set up the infrastructure to maximize him, which has made that pick a wasted pick. And I would be fine running it back with Charbonnet and McIntosh, maybe drafting a guy in the mid-rounds.
Do you know who Ken Walker ran all over in college?
Michigan.
Maybe Jim Harbaugh remembers that game. Maybe he'd trade for him.
McDonald brought up the other day. He's one of the few guys that's beaten him in college in the locker room. So I would move him. And nothing against him. It's because he's in the last year of his deal. He still has some value, and I think you could be fine. And everyone's like, well, we're getting rid of the quarterback. We're getting rid of the running back. I know. But look, when Zach Charbonnet was in, the running game was good. I don't think you need to have two great runners. And I think Kenny McIntosh as a complimentary back was totally fine. I think they need to have the infrastructure to make these guys work, or else they're just wasting these guys. And Kenneth Walker, if they had a good run blocking line, I think he'd be a stud. I think he'd be a Pro Bowler.
If I could get a fourth for him, I'd do it.
Yeah.
And it's a great running back draft. So, Jeff, you could draft somebody in round 4, round 5, maybe even round 6, who could be a backup for Zach Charbonnet. And you've still got Zach Charbonnet for 2 years of great contract control. So I think I agree with you. I'm down for that. And it'd be hard, especially if you went somewhere like the Chargers and was great. But eventually you kind of just have to draw a line under it. And it's a shame because he is so talented.
It's a shame. I really like Kenny Walker. I think he's awesome. But I think until I see them fix the issue to maximize him, if he was in his rookie contract, if in the first year of his rookie contract, if this was his first year, I wouldn't even consider the idea.
And they don't seem to have any idea how to turn these two guys into Montgomery and get. Yeah, they don't know how to do it.
It doesn't work because Charbonnet as a complimentary guy he seems to be a volume runner, and when he's coming in as a change of pace, he's been awful. He was awful in that role this year, and I was very critical of him. But as a starter, he's looked more complete. I think Walker's way more talented, but he's been more complete of a back in my opinion. And I think once they've start doing those duo runs, I would have loved to see Walker more with that line, but there's just too many times where Walker has so much room in front of him and he tries to go horizontally and just leaves. Again, this is nitpicking, but I just don't think I would pay a running back right now based on the system they have. And when you have a back on the team that's a competent running back that a lot of people thought could have been a starting running back. I know a lot of people were disappointed the Seahawks drafted Charbonnet. He's a good back.
He's a good player.
Yeah.
He's a good player. He's a lead runner. And in the style that they want to play. But he has to be the lead. He can't he's useless coming in for a series or two in a game. He's not that kind of back. You can use Kenny McIntosh to do that. That's why you draft someone like Kenny McIntosh to come in and give the guy a breather. It's like a 7th round pick who can do a job. Like that's what you don't need a second rounder to do that. Make Charbonnet the lead. Make McIntosh the 2. Go and get another one like an undrafted free agency or in the later rounds because it's a great running back draft. And if you get something for Ken Walker, so be it. I think that's perfectly acceptable. PA with this incredibly generous super chat. Really thank you for that. Rob, I can rarely catch these streams live, but always listen to them later. I just wanted to thank you for the incredible work you do for the Seahawks fans. I really like these post-game streams with Jeff and hope they will continue next season. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, PA. And thank you. And the one thing I love about doing these, Jeff, is it reassures me that because sometimes when I'm on Twitter, I kind of feel like there's about 6 of us who share an opinion sometimes. And then I come and do these, or I write an article, and I realize there's actually quite a significant portion of Seahawks fans who, 1, want to talk about serious things, and 2, tend to agree with the opinions that we share. And it is reassuring sometimes. But I only kind of experience that when we're doing the streams. Like when you're online, it feels like a different world sometimes. I don't know if you've experienced that.
Oh, I've tried to get off Twitter. I've tried to go on that Blue Sky thing for a bit. Someone told me recently, like, Twitter doesn't represent the masses, and you get a lot of like-minded people or people that like to be talked online. So you see a lot of, if I went around and asked people about Ryan Grubb at the Seahawks game, you would get such different answers than you would get online. And you see a lot of hive-minded thinkers and guys who want to find like-minded people. So, I experience that all the time. It's a bad place. It's an unhealthy place. Fortunately, it's one of the best ways to get football information.
Well, it's the best way to get breaking news. But here's a great example. Somebody told me my tweet yesterday, which said that the franchise is a jolt. He said it was something like a ridiculously stupid take, and then went on to explain how they need to spend loads of money on the offensive line. And I says, well, you kind of agree with me there. You're asking for a completely different approach to the offensive line. How is that not a jolt? But like, you prefixed this comment with, "This is the stupidest thing I've read all week," and I was like, "But you're literally saying they need to do things differently."
I know. Like, I got into it a little bit yesterday. I don't know if any of you saw, with Peter Schrager from the NFL.
I saw it. I enjoyed it.
So, like, he tweeted out something that I thought was one of the silliest things I've ever seen. The reason this kind of triggered me is because he's got a history of, like, just pumping up the Rams for anything they do. And, like, the Rams coming off the game they had, like, it was a pretty embarrassing performance to how they won the division off that game. Like, I don't like the Rams, but he tweeted out, like, the Rams are back in the building today, studying the Seahawks. They're no days off. And I'm like, every NFL coach does that. They played the day before.
Literally every other team was doing
I'm
that.
Like, so I tweeted, I'm like, did that really need to be said? Like, when we start saying, like, they woke up this morning, like, and he, like, got into it with me. He's like, are you okay, dude? Like, I picked the Seahawks to make the playoffs. I'm like, my take has nothing to do with the Seahawks.
No, you're an unhinged fan, Jeff, because you didn't appreciate his ball washing of the Rams.
And I'm just like, then I asked him jokingly, like, what did the Texans staff do today? But he didn't seem to find it very funny. And so Twitter can be like a hostile place sometimes over nothing. And sure, maybe I'm victim of that there, or guilty of that. But I enjoy these streams too, because you need context, and I like people that have different opinions. If I just want to hear the same opinion as me all the time, it would be boring. But there's so many whiny or miserable. It's a bad place.
That's the great thing, is, like, I love having differences of opinion with people, and would love to come on these things and spend an hour talking with somebody who would disagree with pretty much everything I said. I'm not got a problem with that. But too often when people disagree with you these days, it has to be implied that you're in some way slightly mental for having a different opinion to them. And I just think that's such a terrible road to go down. Argue the points, make your case. You don't have to make it personal. You don't have to imply that someone's unhinged simply for that. Anyway, rants over about the internet. Still got a load of super chats to get through, and there's a couple of things I wanted to ask Jeff. Jeff, by the way, as soon as you get to the point where you've had enough, just send me a private message and I'll wrap it up.
No.
Darth says, how much of it is on Grubb and how much is it on Gino audibling out of plays and making dumb decisions? Now, Jeff, this has been, thank you, Darth, for the super chat. I think a lot of people are saying this, like, oh, they don't run as much because Gino might audible and stuff like that. And there may be some nuggets of truth to that. I think the offensive game planning, flow, the half-field read stuff, the predictable screens that Mookie Alexander and others and Griff and others have kind of highlighted, the lack of play action, the fact that they don't seem to run any of the plays off play action that, connect everything together. It doesn't matter really whether Gino's audibling out of a lot of it. I think I've just seen so much of that I've had enough of Grubb, and I think it's almost like conventional wisdom now that he's gonna leave in a week.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of the issues are in Grubb. You just covered a lot of the things I would have said. Like, even the Bears game where it was raining and they couldn't do anything, it just felt like they were making the wrong designs. And I can understand what they were trying to do. And there's just how many times I'll look the next day and there'll be 3 receivers in one area, which means it's a design issue. And you watch again how the Vikings end the game yesterday, like the creativity and this, like, logic of how they balance protections. But what I haven't liked about Grubb is it's felt very collegey, where it's the run into the pass game don't connect. You see a lot of spacing issues. You see a lot of the half field reads you talked about. It's all very collegey, and it doesn't look like what a lot of the NFL teams do. Is they do a lot of window dressing where everything kind of looks the same, and you can't tell. And the Seahawks kind of do the exact. I know Griff and Maddie from their show, they talk a lot about how the Seahawks run play action. They run it to a side that they never actually run to. So the teams can tell right away what they're doing. And Mookie has done an amazing job talking about how teams have just gotten reads off what they're doing. Like, they have tells that are dead obvious. So I think a lot of it comes down. That's why I talk about infrastructure and structure a lot. That's on the offensive coordinator, and especially on this team where they have a new O-line coach, and a lot of that's connected. But Gino historically has not been very good at audibles. I find he audibles into runs in some bad spots very often. And there's not a lot of plays where I feel where he's audibling and it works. I've noticed it like the last couple of years. He seems to play best in these 2-minute drives when he's playing loose and just cutting it loose. I find when he's just like, but Gino's very good at reading defenses. He's very good at like identifying proper football stuff. I found his audibling has been kind of weird over the years. He's audibled into runs that haven't worked very often, and 2-minute drills. He's kind of left some things short. But no, I put Grubb on a much higher level of what a lot of the issues are systemically on offense.
I would really recommend people read Mucky Alexander. I've really enjoyed a lot of his work over the last couple of years. Okay, let's get through the rest. Nears sent another one. If G's and C's are going to be seriously worked on, do you consider bringing back Abe Lucas? I don't think he should. And have a replacement through the free agency in the draft. Sucks to say about him after his rookie year. Nearsall, I'm going to disagree with that. I think Abe Lucas has been perfectly fine since coming back. And I think you start him again next year, Jeff. And if he can stay healthy and he can continue to settle into things after recovering from his injury, I think you could have a right tackle for the future there.
Yeah, I see that very different than what he said. I don't think Lucas has played great since he's came back, but like, look, he needs an offseason, get his body right, build up the strength again. I think he's been pushed around a couple times. That Packers game he had a really rough moment. I think he's been pretty solid right tackle. And I think you've seen the run game specifically get a lot better since he got back in there. So I actually think I would keep him. I think one of the moves I actually liked the Seahawks made this year that did not work out was the George Fant signing. I thought they were very smart to hedge that spot. Fortunately, Fant only lasted 2 quarters, but that's bad luck. He got injured. I think they need to have a plan again. I don't think you can go in just being like Stone Forsythe and Mike Jarrell are going to be our right tackles. But I would be, barring like his body not holding up and he's just being like, I can't do this anymore, I'd actually be pretty comfortable with Lucas coming back at right tackle. I think it's guard, center, guard is where they got to. Oluwatimi especially has looked really limited the more we've seen. We've talked about it on this show a bunch of stuff. Like the more you get a sample on a guy, you tend to see they tend to get exposed. Oluwatimi, I think more so than almost any of them. He just looks, he's fine. He's not, there's nothing wrong with him. But he looks to me like a backup center. And he's a good backup center. If you have to play him in a pinch, he's very capable. But I think he has some limitations, physical strength. He doesn't get out at the second level very well. He doesn't read things very well sometimes. I think a lot of NFL offensive linemen can see the limitations there. So they did pretty well with him as the sixth round pick or 5th round pick. He's a capable backup lineman, but they need to upgrade him. I think Lamea has some issues with foot speed, but I think he's shown some pretty good stuff. But again, that's a spot they could upgrade. He'd be a very good backup lineman. And Laken Tomlinson, they definitely got to upgrade on. So I would not move on from Abe Lucas. No way. You can't create another issue.
The good thing is I think there are some very appealing interior offensive linemen in the draft. It's, can you get a couple of veterans as well?
Yes.
So that 1, you don't necessarily have to throw them in at the deep end. And 2, you don't necessarily have to throw, say, 2 rookies in at the deep end. Have them playing next to Lemaire or Haynes. And that's like 3 inexperienced interior offensive linemen. Jeff, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more super chats. Do you want me to look at them separately? And because I've got 2 more quick topics I wanted to bring up to you.
So bring up the topics. Bring up the topics.
Yeah. So the first one is, this is about the defense. Now, somebody asked me if I would bring this up in the stream, and I said I would, and get your views on this. So I will read what was put to me, and then you give me your response. Conventional and probably fair wisdom is that the defense is much improved this season. But here is the points given up to the playoff teams. Lions 42 points, Bills 31, Packers 30, Vikings 27, and then they noted the Rams, they got 26 points, but that included a pick 6. So as much as they are better, how much is that really helping the team against the best teams? And does this maybe add credence to the idea that getting an offensive-minded head coach may have helped them more than going defensive? So that was the points that I was asked to raise. What do you think about that? I mean, I suppose my thought would be, obviously they've changed a lot defensively, and I don't think giving up. I think the Packers game was so bad, like, and the Vikings they had just had little plays that sort of ruined everything. They have improved the defense clearly. I still think it would have been better to go with an offensive-minded head coach, but I understand why they didn't in the end. And I think they have to play the hand that you were dealt in that regard. And I like Mike McDonald, but I think there is perhaps a nugget of truth in there. Like, what do you think?
I don't agree with that, actually. I would think there's a lot of holes in that logic. Okay, let's go through the games. Detroit, they were missing their entire defensive line. Leonard Williams didn't play. They had 2 linebackers playing who are now not on the team anymore. So what is that? 7 of 11 starters who are playing are not there. Buffalo game, same thing. They had Tyrell Dotson starting. That was Ernest Jones' first game. That game I kind of threw out the window because after Ernest Jones settled in and we started that first Rams game, they transformed defensively. Baltimore did the same thing when they got Roquan Smith in McDonald's first stop. And obviously Roquan Smith's a far better player. But when Ernest Jones settled in, their defense took a giant step. And so the Rams game they brought up, they allowed 13 points in regulation. They were the dominant side of the ball in that game. They should have won the game before that. The pick 6 was 19 that sent to overtime, but they should have won the game before they couldn't get 1 yard on 2 plays. So, yeah, they had a lot of points. The Green Bay game, the first half was alarming. But the thing that kind of calmed me down was the second half, Josh Jacobs was under 2 yards a carry. So I think what Green Bay saw was a schematic issue, and McDonald kind of wouldn't elaborate on it. And they were getting to the line really quickly, and they exposed something with their game plan. That was something that was for sure we should take note of that. Don't overlook that. But in the second half, they did fix the issue. Once they adjusted schematically, Josh Jacobs, I think, was 12 carries for 14 yards. And they didn't really score a point until Sam Howell threw that interception. That was it. Minnesota game was a good but not great. If Byron Murphy doesn't face mask and Kobe Bryant doesn't jump offside, that is a totally different game. The defense should have won them that game. Again, you want to see them close it out, but they made a lot of error. Tariq Woolen, little things. So I don't think you could connect a lot of it, especially like there were games where once like they got the guys they wanted and the defense came together, they were an objectively good defense. Like Arizona scored a ton of points against a lot of other teams after that. All things being equal, I would absolutely say I would prefer to have an offensive head coach. For the reasons we talked about, we're in that bleak world we were scared of already, of who's the OC going to be. But when you look at their thing, Ben Johnson was the finalist. He dropped out of the running. That left you with who? It's Mike Kafka, who is a non-play caller. If you watch the Hard Knocks, he didn't look like a type A to me. Like
there was like him and Slowick and Callahan, who's been bombed in Tennessee.
Yes. And he got hired quick. He was one of the first hirings in the cycle. So I think McDonald was the best bet they could have made in that cycle. Obviously, they couldn't get Jim Harbaugh. I think he was going to Chargers or bust. So I still think the defense showed. I think the Ernest Jones things really tightened them up because a lot of the issues in that Detroit game and the San Francisco game, the linebacker play was, as you say, bullocks. It was pathetic. And they were getting, and it kind of really ruined the infrastructure of the entire defense. They're not all of a sudden going to be a top 3 defense automatically. There are questions. I think they're. We talked this earlier in the year. I still think they need more of the edge rush group. I still think they have issues at corner if Tariq Woolen's kind of up and down. But I still think the body of work overall was really good. They took a defense that was 30th in most categories. They ended up in the top 10 with a lot of the same players. So I think there's a lot of positives on that side of the ball. My questions are more on the offensive side of the ball, honestly.
Agreed. And I think when you look at the defense, it's all about getting the offense right. If you plonk a Lamar Jackson type quarterback who just elevates the offense, Jeff, this could be a really good team. They could complement each other very well. If you get the offensive structure of like the Vikings, well coached, know what they're doing, can get more out of the players at their disposal, this can be a really good team. It's about sort of pairing the two things together. So I don't really think the defense is a problem at all. I don't think it's an elite defense. It's a really good defense in the minute.
I would agree.
But I think you've got to get the offense right. If you get the offense right and pair it with this, it can be really good. The other sort of topic I wanted to get to with you, and I don't know how serious you want to take this. It kind of bothered me a little bit that Quandre Diggs was wading into things today. And he tweeted it to Michael Sean DeGara. He was talking about Geno Smith, and he waded in to say, like, people aren't talking about the thing that, that's the real issue or something like this. And people are wondering, what's he talking about there? Is he talking about? I thought the offensive line. People were saying like it's John Schneider. Then someone said about Schneider, and Quandre Diggs was very quick to go, "Oh no, I'm not talking about John Schneider," which I never thought he was, because, however, even if he thought John Schneider was doing a crap job, this is John Schneider who acquired him for Seattle and gave him 2 massive contracts. Like, it would be quite the thing to then go on Twitter and go, he's doing a bad job. Like, if you just keep that to yourself. So I don't think he was ever going to do that on Twitter. But he was always quite noisy as a player. Like, he would often like quote tweet praise or an article or a video that was celebrating him. And then he's moved on, Jeff. I don't really appreciate him like wading into things, stirring things up like a gossiping teenager. Like, if you've got something to say it. If you think the problem's been the O-line all this time, just say it. No one's going to disagree with you. Like, if you've got a point to make, let's hear it. Or tell one of your buddies in the media to say what the problem is. Like, I don't get this kind of like subtweety kind of thing going on here, Jeff, from an ex-player.
It bothered me. I don't like when athletes are like vague and they're kind of implying we know something you don't. And I know sometimes reporters do that and it pisses me off, but he seems to be like the king of that, where like, you're not on the team anymore. Like, you don't know what's going on. You haven't been around the head coach. I'm sure you're a little pissed off you got cut. Yeah, like, just come out and say it. Like, it's kind of like drama queenie. It's kind of like you want to be the center of attention. It's very like NBA. Like, that happens a lot. I don't know how much you follow the NBA. I used to be a big NBA guy. I've completely soured on that league. It's very much like what's going on there, and I didn't appreciate it either. I thought it was kind of I don't know. It was like a cry for attention almost. And like, I get it. And he's like, look, he's been like weirdly like, well, since he got hurt, like there's times like the Seahawks won big games and he's out there cheering for Geno. And I don't know if he's talking about the O-line. I don't know if he's talking about DK. Like, who knows? But yeah, like, what's the point of being vague and just kind of like stirring up the whole fan base? It's like, it's kind of a chicken shit move. Like, or DM Mike off the record. Like, why not?
Know. I bet he's got his number. Like, text him. They're obviously close. Like, just text him. I'm sure they talk. If he's tweeting him, he probably talks off the record with him. Like, I don't know. It just felt like something. And then you get all the aggregator accounts that are tweeting about it, and then everyone's talking. People are sending it to you, and you're thinking, "Oh my word!"
I saw Mookie writing to you like, "It's definitely Schneider," and I'm like, do we know this?" Like, and then he's like, "No, it's not Schneider."
So just tell us what it is, man. If it's the O-line or something, like, who cares? Like you're not criticizing one guy.
Too. You're like, yeah, thanks, Quandre. No one talks about the offensive line here.
Yeah, it's a moot point.
I don't know. He's talking about, like, what else could he be talking about? He's not talking about Tyler Lockett.
I know. Like, it's the biggest problem. Actually, it's the punter. His touchback rate's gone up. I don't know. It just feels a bit unnecessary. So very quickly, Tim says, if the Raiders send us a 3rd and a 4th this year for DK and Geno Smith, would we do it? They need a bridge QB and an elite receiver. Happy Christmas, Carly, Noah, Harley. What do you think? I mean, if the Raiders offered that for your starting receiver and quarterback, I mean, I'm not against. I'm not against trading them, Jeff. But yeah, I would agree with you. I think a 3rd and a 4th, maybe a 2nd and a 4th.
Yeah, I think you got to get a little more than that if you're going to give up DK and Geno. That's a pretty big.
Would a high 2nd for DK and a 4th for Geno? Would you do that?
I would do that. I think that gives you a lot of stock. A high 2nd. This, again, not a great draft in the 1st round, but I would be more willing to kind of get off that money, spend in free agency, put it into the offensive line, like we talked about with the defensive line last year. They paid Leonard Williams. That deal looks excellent. He's probably been the best defensive free agent in the league this year. And we talked about putting in the trenches. They've become a pretty good defensive line. Like, that performance against Chicago was pretty incredible. But I would be willing to take that shot. We've talked about DK and some of the things. Again, with these guys, everyone just thinks like, we hate DK, we hate Geno. To me, it's all about money and valuation. If you can get DK for $15 million or $20 million, great, keep him. But if the question is, do I rather have a second round or spend that on a receiver and get like the arbitrage value? I think it's a much easier way to build a team. I think you can see like there's enough. You can find receivers in this draft. And high second round pick. That'd be a great spot for.
I think it's good value. And the Raiders are now 8th overall.
They won the last 2 weeks. The Jaguars and the Giants are blowing their draft pick.
Yeah, given where they are, Jeff, if you could put DK on the field with Brock Bowers and you have a Geno Smith at quarterback, if you're a Raiders fan, you go, yeah. And then you get a top 10 pick to spend on a different position. Like that would make some sense for where they are, but it would gut the Seahawks in terms of they'd have a lot of money to spend. They could reinvest it. They could work things differently, but it would be a very different looking Seahawks next year. This one from Hawks fan Matt Mann says, Bryce Coots expressed some possible interest in a recent pod in Hendon Hooker as a free agent and Cal McCord as a draft prospect. Thoughts on those two? Well, Hendon Hooker's actually got 2 more years left on his deal.
Yeah, wasn't he drafted last year?
Yeah, he's got two more years left on his deal. Now, I don't know why the Lions would trade him, Jeff, unless it was a really attractive deal, because they've got a backup quarterback there for cheap who's been within their system for 2 years. It would take quite a deal, I think, to get him out. I remember speaking to someone in the league who loved Hendon Hooker. Well, I said loved. He thought he would have been a first rounder without the injury. I didn't agree with that, but he did. And this is a very respectable person within the NFL. So there's definitely people who thought Hooker was good. I don't think watching him in the preseason games, he never wowed me, Jeff, to want to spend, like, let's say, a second rounder on him or something, which is what it might take given why else would the Lions move him? So I'm not sure about that one. Cal McCord, to me, is just a guy. He threw 5 interceptions in a half. And I know he's had a very productive year, but this is a guy that Ohio State said, we don't want you to be here anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's got an NFL starting future, Jeff.
No, people like McCord doesn't do it for me. Like that would be a low ceiling, low floor option. He strikes me at best he's a backup quarterback. I don't even know if he is. The Hooker thing doesn't really make sense because he's 2 years away after the season from even hitting the market. So he's not going to be a free agent until after 2027 or 2027 off season. So that's not even worth discussing at this point. That's way too far away. And yeah, I thought he was a guy that, like, I know some people really liked him before that injury, but he was in like a funky college scheme, and I don't know. I have questions. He was older. He's like 24 years old. I wouldn't touch that.
Yeah, not for me. Matt has also sent in another one saying, could a different OC and an improved O-line make it work with Sam Howell? It's hard for me to believe that he's just a lost cause. I have to say, Matt, I thought he was a day 3 pick in the draft. I didn't rate him at Washington. I think he's looked awful when he's played for Seattle in, preseason or that Packers game. I kind of think he is a lost cause, Jeff.
It was a good flyer for them to take. I thought it was smart given where they were in the draft. But yeah, to me, it was low ceiling player. Like we talk about all the issues with Geno. Geno is way better than Sam Howell. He's worlds better. I know we talk about like the move of taking a younger guy. Howell's a backup quarterback, and he was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in NFL history last year. I think 5th most sacks. So you got to get an offensive line around him, and he had some tools that were. But whenever they talk about him, they just talk about how tough he is. They don't talk about like that he's actually good at quarterback. They're just like, he's tough. I'm just like, I don't know. Everyone I know around the team, and Brian from my show got credentials this year. He was down at training camp. He was like, I cannot tell you how bad Sam Howell looked. And Greg Bell, Condotta, Henderson, those guys, they all kind of all said the same thing. Like, this guy stunk. So I don't think he's a lost cause per se, but he's going into last year's deal next year. I think he was a 5th rounder. That was the year they traded Russell Wilson in that horrible quarterback draft, Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis. None of these guys have really worked out so far. Although Green Bay's got in functional play at Malik Willis. I don't know if you'd want to see that over a full season. But no, Howell never did it for me.
And here's the thing with that trade last year, or this year, isn't it? Still 2024, but that showed that John was conscious of needing to do something. And it makes me think if you are someone who is inclined to think, will John Schneider be proactive at the quarterback position? That is, at least, if nothing else, an example that he perhaps will be. Okay, very quickly, feed me more Seahawks. Oh, okay, I got there in the end. Ryan Grubber's high risk, high reward, not a bad idea. Yeah, I mean, it was a shot to nothing, but they're going to move on, and rightly so. Appreciate the super chat. B. Comsey clearly says, is it Cliff Kingsbury or Jaden Daniels is a star? I think Daniels is clearly a star, but I do think Cliff Kingsbury deserves a little bit of credit for what he's done. He's overachieved. Chris says, trade DK, get T. Higgins instead, better and cheap. I mean, T. Higgins is going to cost an absolute fortune.
It's going to be the same price. It'll be more than DK. T. Higgins is a great receiver.
I mean, Joe Burrow is not going to let him leave. Like, Joe Burrow runs the Bengals right now.
And you got to outbid the Patriots and the Chargers. The Patriots have $100 million in cap space. So
Joe Burrow will go into the office and go, if you don't sign that guy, I'm off. Yeah. He will tell him that. Like, the way he spoke after the game was like, T. Higgins, T. Higgins, T. Higgins. Like, the three of them, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins have the same agent now. They've changed agents to the same. They want to stay with Joe Burrow. They know the three of them have got a good thing going. And they have. And they just need to sort that. I mean, sort that O-line out and sort that defense out. That can be a heck of a team. Nizul, thank you for a third and a fourth one. With McDonald as head coach, how confident do you have maybe Schneider change his approach to the draft and free agency as opposed to Pete? I think we will be pleasantly surprised by how proactive he intends to be, Jeff. The key is going to be in the deliverance. It's all well and good saying you intend to do something, having the best intentions, be motivated to do something. Can he deliver the offseason the Seahawks have needed for years? That's going to be the key. And I have to say, it's hard to be confident about that until it happens, and then you can believe it.
Yeah, I wish I was more confident. I'm not confident because I haven't seen it. Their free agency patterns have been mostly bad. And I'm hoping McDonald kind of lays the hammer down. Like, we need to do something different. Let's bring in my guys. And we've talked about for years, the thing that's driven me crazy about the Seahawks is that the coach wanted to play away, and the front office and personnel moves never reflected the way they want to play. And to me, like, okay, we're bringing in Mike McDonald and we signed Noah Fant, that $10 million deal. Like, I never understood that. Like, didn't connect. They signed linebackers that didn't fit his system. So their in-season moves, the Roy Robertson Harris and Ernest Jones, those were good moves. And so hopefully there's something to work off of there, but Schneider has done a lot of in-season trades that have worked out in the past. So I'm really hoping McDonald really has a bigger influence this year and can say, like, we need to become physical. We need to become violent, like, on the offense. Let's not sign our money on a crappy receiver. So I'm not confident. I'm hopeful. And it's just wait and see. This is a huge offseason for them. They got to get it right.
Final question for you, Jeff. I pitched the idea in the article we talked about cheap quarterbacks, and it's very hard to find who could be the next Mayfield and Darnold and stuff. Of the kind of, what do you have any faith that someone like Zach Wilson could turn his career around in the right environment? Physically talented, looked good at BYU, flopped epically at the Jets. I worry about his mentality, the fact he was a one-year wonder at BYU. Could they have a dabble at someone like that, or Daniel Jones, who I think, if nothing else, has made a smart move, sort of spending a bit of time in Minnesota and sort of seeing firsthand how they operate and how Darnold's operated. And then there's there's like Trey Lance and people like that. I mean, like, but is there anybody that you think, well, do you know what, for $5 million or $4 million or whatever, I wouldn't mind seeing them.
I'm curious what Carson Wentz looks like this week. He's been around Andy Reid the last year. He was around McVay last year, and he's going to play on Sunday against Denver. And I don't know how old he is now. He was drafted the same year as Goff, so he's got to be a little older.
I think he's 31, I think.
Yeah. He would be someone I might be willing to take a shot on.
It's his birthday today. He's turned 32 today.
So 30, a little older than I would like. He's someone I'm be a little curious on. Like, some guys go to Andy Reid, they can kind of revamp their careers. He's gone more. I'm curious what he looks like. I don't know if he's going to play with any of the other starters, but that's a guy. If you can get him in for cheap, $8 million, obviously you'd like someone like the Zach Wilson one would be younger because at least it gets you a path. But that's someone I'd be curious on. Zach Wilson, he always struck me as a bit of an airhead. That's the thing that would worry me about him. He always struck me as like just didn't have the mentality I always thought a quarterback had.
That mentality is the main thing there.
Yeah,
look at Burrow's mentality.
Yeah, he's a killer,
like
man.
Laser
He's a killer.
focus.
Yeah, like all these quarterbacks, they're killers, and Zach Wilson seems like kind of like a Gen Z kind of goofy.
What about Jones? I mean, I'm not I'm not for a second suggesting it, but Hugh Millen thinks he's great. I for whatever that's worth, and I think if nothing else, Jeff, he showed a lot of awareness going to Minnesota.
Like, look, if you want to replicate the Darnold thing, Jones is probably the carbon copy of like, if you would have said Sam Darnold to me 2 years ago, we would have laughed at this idea. If you would have said Baker Mayfield 2 years ago, would have laughed. Jones was the top 10 pick in the disaster situation that didn't work out. He's big, he's strong. We saw in the Seahawks game, if you have a good game plan, he could be effective. So I don't think it's a crazy idea from like a football standpoint. I think he was self-aware. I think he was in a bad spot. And we've seen guys have left the Jets. Gino and Darnold seem to have a moment on the field after the game, kind of acknowledging we got out ahead of this. And I think they both appreciate leaving the Jets. So I think Daniel Jones, based on his age and his point, but if you're like running the Seahawks and you're trying to get like interest in the fan base again, it's a hard sell. It's a really hard sell.
Very last thing. Darnold gets to free agency. Would you pay him?
Yes.
Interesting.
I would.
I've
seen enough. I'd pay him. I think that hope is. I think we were onto that earlier. I think that hope is gone.
I think they have to lose in the first round of the playoffs.
I think he would have to like flop in like considerable fashion, where like because they're going to play Tampa. I think they could win. They could be the 1 seed if they win next week. So
he would have to lose in the playoffs, Jeff, and they would have to determine.
Yeah, it would have to be like a Dan Quinn moment from last year's playoffs, which funny enough, Dan Quinn's had an excellent year this year, but he has Jaden Daniels. The Seahawks do not. So,
yeah. Well, we'll leave it on that. I agree with you though. If he makes it, I'd be interested. Oh, actually, do you know what? Here's one thing there. What if they franchise him and say we're willing to let him leave because we believe in JJ McCarthy, but we're going to franchise him, make us an offer.
If you could get Josh McCown in the building, that would be a lot more appealing.
Second rounder? What if they asked for more than that? I mean, the Jets got a second rounder for Sam Darnold from the Panthers.
Yeah, I'd probably do it.
I don't know how I'd answer that. I'd have to have a think about that.
I just think at least it gives you a plan.
He's only 27.
I know. I think it's the right age. But
you know about that killer thing? Did you see the look in his eye yesterday?
Yes.
He was pissed off for greatness, to coin that old phrase.
And Gino at times has that. Like when Gino's rolling, he does have that, but just too much up and down.
Jeff,
I like Darnold, man. I'm sold.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Listen, 90 minutes, and I appreciate your time, and everybody else does as well. We love hearing from you, Jeff, and thank you for that. Great analysis from Jeff Simmons, as always, and very generous with his time. I want to say, first of all, thank you to everybody who's been watching this live. I think this is the biggest numbers we've had for one of these Monday streams, and I just really appreciate everybody for checking this out. Really appreciate those super chats. Incredibly generous of you to support the channel in the way that you do. A plea as we just wrap up this stream. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Like the numbers are going up, but they're going up really painfully slowly. Like let's get up towards 10,000. If you enjoy what we do, we're going to have a lot more of this in the build up to the off season, to the draft. We're here all the time. So subscribe. You won't miss any of the videos. So make sure you subscribe. If you could like the video and leave a comment, I would massively appreciate that. And don't forget, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. I've got an article up there today discussing the quarterback situation. Had some thoughts on them not making the playoffs yesterday. Go and check out that article as well. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for all of the analysis that you're going to need over the next few months as we enter the offseason after the final game. Big thank you to everybody. Have a great end to 2024. Happy New Year to you all. Next stream will be after that Rams game to wrap up the season. Join us for that. Until then, bye for now. Happy New Year.